Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back, way back, to a place where feelings were optional, childhood was canceled at age 7, and dinner was something you stole because starvation was the lesson. Welcome to ancient Sparta, the military factory disguised as a city-state. But before you get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket. Just know that if you were born in Sparta, that blanket would have been inspected for weakness, and probably repurposed as a spear wrap. Let's dive into what it really meant to grow up Spartan. Spoiler, it wasn't CrossFit. It was war school with extra trauma. Chapter 1. Born to be inspected. Congratulations, you've just been born. Are you crying? Good. Are you breathing? Better. Are you missing a toe? Oh. In Sparta, babies weren't greeted with lullabies. They were greeted with a government inspection. Elders, yes, actual city officials, would examine your tiny newborn body like a piece of fruit at the market. Any signs of weakness, deformity, or non-optimal war potential, and, well, it's Mount Tegetus for you. No, that's not a charming rustic retreat. That's the cliff where Sparta discarded infants who didn't make the cut. Why? Because Sparta didn't do sympathy. It did survival. If your legs looked funny or your cries weren't fierce enough, you were considered a future liability. No pressure, baby. Now picture this scene. It's dawn. A midwife wraps you in scratchy linen. Your mother, sore from childbirth, isn't smiling. She's praying. Outside, two elders with grim expressions hold a torch, a checklist, and the authority of the state. They're not here to coo over your baby cheeks. They're here to evaluate your worth to the military-industrial machine. The test doesn't last long. They check your limbs, spine, breathing. If you twitch funny, you fail. And in Sparta, failing means you don't get a second chance. The system wasn't cruel for the sake of it, at least not in their eyes. Sparta believed in preserving strength and eliminating weakness at the root. Mount Tegetus wasn't a myth, it was policy. Some babies never made it back down the trail. If you survived, the elders handed you back to your mother like a tool that passed inspection. That was your first victory in a life filled with battles you didn't choose. Chapter 2. Your parents love you, but not enough to stop Sparta. Let's say you pass the inspection. You're a keeper, for now. You're returned to your family, but don't get too comfortable, because raising you is less about nurturing and more about prepping you for the next test. Your mother becomes your first drill sergeant. Spartan women were no joke. They were trained too, physically, mentally, and verbally. Forget lullabies. You got sharpened wisdom delivered like a knife wrapped in wool. She'll teach you that crying doesn't solve anything, that wounds don't deserve sympathy, and that life is a contest between toughness and failure. This isn't gentle parenting. It's survival prep. She might say, if you stumble, rise. If you fall, fight. And if you lose, do it with clenched teeth. There's no baby talk in a Spartan household. You're encouraged to walk early, climb high, and fall hard, because the agoge is waiting, and your mother knows the state will take you at age 7. Her job is to toughen you up enough to survive it. And your father? If he's even around, he's not your bedtime story kind of guy. He lives most of his life in the barracks with the other men, training for war and serving the state. He might show up once in a while to give you advice, or a disapproving look. In Sparta, fathers weren't affectionate. They were benchmarks you were supposed to surpass. So you grow up knowing love, but rarely seeing it. You learn obedience, but not comfort. Your parents do care about you, but through the lens of duty, not warmth. Because in Sparta, emotion was a liability. Your family wasn't a refuge. It was a launch pad into hardship. Chapter 3. Childhood. Ends at 7, forever. You're 7 years old. In most parts of the world, that's the age of cartoons, sticker books, and mildly embarrassing birthday parties. In Sparta, that's the year the state comes to collect. A group of officials arrives, no drama, no horns, no emotion, just men in cloaks holding lists and expectations. They're not here for tea, they're here for you. You don't say goodbye, that's weakness. Your mother doesn't cry, that's indulgent. She holds your gaze like a soldier sending another soldier off to war. Maybe she nods, maybe she whispers, "Come back stronger." That's all the love you get and all you'll need. You join a line of other boys, all clutching coarse sacks with a spare tunic and not much else. No toys, no comfort objects, no cuddly rabbit named Fluffy, just fear, tightly packed behind tight jaws. The gauche is not a school. It is an unrelenting boot camp disguised as a childhood. Welcome to the system. Step 1. Haircut. No choices. You are no longer your mother's child, you are the state's property. Your hair is shaved to match every other initiate. Identity is replaced with uniformity. Step 2. Renaming. Your given name might remain, but it no longer matters. You are addressed by your cohort, your rank, or, if you're unlucky, your failures. Step 3. Discomfort. You're assigned a sleeping space. It's a pile of reeds you gather yourself from the riverbank. No mattress, no pillow. If your back bleeds, too bad, that's part of the training. Step 4. Deprivation. Hunger is immediate. You are fed thin broth, a crust of bread, and the occasional olive pit. Sometimes it's warm, mostly it's not, and it's never enough. Step 5. Reprogramming. You are no longer encouraged to express, to feel, or to question. You're taught to observe, obey, and endure. Sarcasm becomes your shield. Wit is allowed if it cuts like a knife. Everything else, punishable. You run barefoot over rocky terrain. You spar before breakfast. You chant war songs before bed. When your muscles ache and your feet bleed, you don't complain. That's a luxury for other civilizations. Discipline is your new parent. Fear is your new sibling. And pain, that's your constant companion. Tenderness was treated like treason. You learn to bleed quietly, love silently, and survive loudly. Your first whipping. It happens early, maybe on day 2, maybe day 5. But it comes. You forget to salute fast enough, or you hesitate before answering. Or maybe the instructor just doesn't like the way your face looks that morning. The punishment is swift. A lash across the back. Maybe 2. You're told to count them aloud. If your voice shakes, the lashes continue. The older boys watch. Not with cruelty, but indifference. They've been there, and they'll be there again. Some whisper advice, others smirk. One boy stares straight ahead, silently mouthing each count with you. You'll remember him. He'll be your first real friend. Bleeding is normal, crying is not. You learn this fast. What you learn in the first month. You learn to stitch your own tunic. You learn to make sandals out of scraps. You learn how to trap lizards and boil roots. You learn to hide your food and your emotions in the same place, deep and tight. You learn to speak in riddles. A direct answer is too easy. Spartans favor brevity with impact. Say something short, say it sharp, leave them thinking. That's the Spartan way. You also learn the hierarchy. The older boys, the Irenes, have authority. They are only a few years ahead, but they might as well be gods. They test you, push you, sometimes hit you. You learn to obey them, outwit them, and eventually replace them. You dream of escape. For 1 minute. Then you remember the cliffs of Mount Taygetus. There is no escape. Only forward, only harder. The new you. By the end of the first year, your hands are calloused, your feet are raw, your spine is straighter, your face more still. You've learned how to fight, how to steal, how to kneel before authority without breaking eye contact. You've learned that silence isn't empty, it's strategic. You're 7 years old. And childhood? Childhood is a luxury Sparta couldn't afford. Chapter 4. Hunger Games, Spartan Edition. The Agoge didn't just teach discipline, it taught hunger. You don't get 3 meals a day, you don't even get one good one. You get rations, thin, tasteless, and always insufficient. That's on purpose. The system is built to leave you wanting more. Why? Because when you're hungry, you get creative. The state wants you to steal. It just doesn't want you to get caught. You see a kitchen left unattended? That's a test. You sneak in, grab a hunk of bread, maybe a fig if you're lucky, and then hide the evidence. If no one notices, you're a genius. If they do, whipped, publicly, brutally. They're not punishing the theft, they're punishing failure. This is survival training disguised as crime. Some boys become experts, phantoms in the night. Others bleed until they learn. You eat scraps, crumbs. Sometimes bark steeped in broth just to trick your stomach into silence. You chew slowly, stretch the moment. Dream of roasted meat you'll never taste. And when a boy dies during training, the others don't cry. They steal his ration and move on. That's the environment. There's no comfort, no second helpings, only sharp eyes and empty bellies. Hunger is constant. It teaches you patience, strategy, and above all, never let your guard down, not even around friends, because every plate is a battlefield. And survival is the only thing on the menu. Chapter 5. Pain is the performance. Pain is part of the curriculum. But in Sparta, pain isn't private, it's theater. Once a year, the whole city gathers for the festival of Artemis Orthia. It sounds festive until you realize it's basically a blood-soaked talent show. Boys are brought before a shrine and whipped. Not once, not twice, over and over, sometimes for hours. And the crowd, cheering, laughing, betting. This isn't punishment, it's performance. You're judged on how long you last. Not how fast you run or how well you fight, but how long you can stand still while someone skins your back with a lash. No crying, no screaming, just silent agony until you pass out or die. Some mothers don't flinch, some even encourage it. Die well, they say, or don't come home. This ritual isn't about strength, it's about control. It teaches you to own your pain, to weaponize it. You carry the scars like trophies, lines across your back that spell loyalty, toughness, and discipline. It's not just about enduring the lash, it's about showing everyone, especially your comrades, that you fear nothing. Not pain, not humiliation, not death. Because in Sparta, fear is treason, and endurance is your armor. Chapter 6. Brotherhood. Built on bruises. In the Agoge, friendship isn't optional, it's vital. But don't mistake it for kindness. This isn't a schoolyard clique. You don't bond over toys or shared hobbies. You bond over bruises, humiliation, and the slow, grinding trauma of transformation. You train with your group, called a herd. You sleep beside them, sweat beside them, bleed beside them. They're your teammates, your rivals, your mirrors, and your measuring sticks. They're also your witnesses. In Sparta, everything is public. Every mistake, every tremble, every flinch. You can't hide who you are when you're scraping your knees on the same gravel as everyone else. There are no secrets in a herd, and if there are, they get beaten out fast. In the agoge, weakness wasn't punished, it was preemptively erased. The law of the herd. You rise together, run together, fail together. If one of you messes up, if someone drops their weapon during drills or forgets the phrasing of a war chant, everyone gets punished. Whipped, starved, humiliated. Collective discipline was the rule, and it had teeth. So you learn quickly, you don't just protect yourself, you protect the herd. Not because you love them, but because your own skin depends on it. That creates something strange, something fierce, something unbreakable. You don't have heart-to-heart talks. You don't cry on each other's shoulders. You don't even use first names half the time. But the loyalty is real. The boy who helped you tie your sandals when your fingers were too swollen? You'll take a spear for him one day. The one who stole extra bread and shared it? You'll remember his kindness when you're half-starved in a trench. The one who mocked you for crying, then threw the first punch in your defense? That's your brother now. Even your enemies become allies. Grudges are real, of course they are, but so is growth. That boy who broke your nose in sparring, he's the one who'll cover your blind side in battle without hesitation. Because the herd eats together, suffers together, survives together, or not at all, fights that build you. Every day there's a new match. Sometimes it's scheduled, sometimes it just happens. The instructors turn a blind eye. Conflict is part of the curriculum. If your ego bruises, too bad. If your lip splits, good. Pain teaches lessons that lectures never will. And when it goes too far, when one boy keeps hitting after the other goes down, that's when the others step in, not the adults, the herd. Because if one of you falls, all of you are smaller. If one of you breaks, it reflects on everyone. The herd polices itself, and sometimes the punishments are worse than anything an instructor would assign. That kind of accountability turns boys into a unit, a wall of fists, eyes, and instincts. And once you've fought side by side with someone, really fought, you see them differently. Maybe you hate them, maybe you trust them, probably both. Either way, you never forget them. Loyalty tests. The agoge is full of secret evaluations, little moral puzzles disguised as ordinary situations. What do you do when a fellow herd member is caught stealing and you're told to report him? What do you say when someone starts crying in the dark after lights out and the instructor is listening? Do you mock them? Defend them? Pretend you didn't hear? Your choices echo. In the silence. In the blood. In the next assignment when you're placed together again. Sometimes your reaction determines whether you become a leader or remain a ghost in the back of the formation. What happens after the agoge? The brotherhood doesn't end at graduation. If you make it through, your herd becomes your core. You march together, eat together, war together. When you're assigned to a military mess group, Syssitia, it's often with the same boys you trained beside. This isn't just habit, it's strategic. You don't want a stranger guarding your flank. You want the boy who helped hide your fever so you wouldn't get expelled. The one who didn't flinch when you confessed you were scared of failing. The one who, when you collapsed in training, didn't stop running, but dragged you with him. Your herd becomes your war family. Not warm, not soft, but loyal beyond reason. And when one of you dies, you don't mourn, you avenge, or at the very least, you march harder. Because in Sparta, your brothers were your only safety net, your only certainty. In a world where softness was punished and individuality erased, they were your compass, your reflection, your shadow, the ones who taught you how to endure the beating and how to walk away from it together. Chapter 7. The Krypteia, Sparta's Secret Murder Internship. Now you're older, maybe 16, 17. You've survived beating, starvation, humiliation. The agoge is almost over. But before you graduate, there's one final, unspoken test. One last horror Sparta doesn't list in its brochures. It's called the Krypteia. Here's how it works. One night, an ephor, a kind of Spartan official, pulls you aside. No ceremony, no warning, just a command. Leave the city. Take this dagger, come back when it's done. What's it? That's the part no one explains. But every Spartan knows you're to go into the countryside. Alone, no supplies, no backup, just your dagger and your instincts. Your mission? Terrorize the Helot population. The Helots are state-owned slaves, Messenian peasants forced to farm so Spartans can train all day. They outnumber citizens, and Sparta fears them. So, once a year, Sparta declares war on the Helots. That makes killing them legal. No trials, no consequences, just sanctioned slaughter. And the Krypteia is how young Spartans prove they're ready. You're expected to sneak into farms at night. Listen, wait, and kill. Anyone who looks too strong, too confident, too hopeful. You become a ghost with a blade, a whisper of terror in the dark. Some boys vanish, some return bloody, others return empty-eyed, never quite the same. The Krypteia teaches stealth, ruthlessness, and obedience without question. It's not just about eliminating threats, it's about removing empathy. If you can kill in cold blood and still salute your superior in the morning, you're ready to be a Spartan. No one talks about the Krypteia afterward. No one asks, no one confesses. But every Spartan who's made it carries the silence like a second sword. And if you pass the test, congratulations, you've just graduated from boy to killer. Chapter 8. Congratulations, you're a soldier now. Forever. You made it. You survived the inspections, the beatings, the starvation, the agoge, the Krypteia, the public whippings, the endless drills, and the emotional suppression. Congratulations. You are now what every Spartan boy is raised to become. A full citizen. A homoios. An equal. But don't mistake this for freedom. You've graduated into something even harder. Perpetual service, welcome to the barracks. You don't get your own house. You don't decorate a cozy apartment or put up drapes and pottery. You move into a communal barracks, a long, narrow room filled with other men just like you. Privacy, a myth. Personal time, hilarious. You sleep shoulder to shoulder. You rise with a trumpet. You eat when you're told. You train even when you're injured. You memorize drill routines like sacred chants. You polish your armor with the same care others might brush a child's hair. You fold your cloak with military precision. You keep your spear tip gleaming. Not for show, but because it's considered an extension of your soul. Every movement is watched. Every mistake noted. You're not allowed to be exceptional. You're allowed to be consistent. The Syssitia, dinner with judgment. You eat all your meals with your assigned Syssitia, your military mess group. This isn't optional, it's part of your identity. If you miss dinner too many times, you don't just get hungry, you get expelled from public life. The stew is still black broth. The pig's blood and vinegar concoction never tastes better. You just get better at lying about it. Everyone brings something to the table, literally. If you don't contribute, you're seen as lazy. If you talk too much, as arrogant. If you eat too slowly, as undisciplined. You're not just feeding your body, you're performing. Every spoonful is a loyalty test. And if your comrades vote to exclude you, that's social death. You might still wear the cloak, but inside, you're invisible. Marriage? Not yet. Even if you have a wife, and many Spartans did by now, you don't live with her. You sneak out at night, see her in the dark, and sneak back before sunrise. You might father a child without ever spending a full day in the same room. Your real marriage is to the state. Romantic feelings are seen as distractions, and distractions get people killed. What do you do all day? You train, you drill, you march. And when you're not doing that, you prepare to do it again. Shield drills, formations, war chants, spear work until your hands bleed. Retreat patterns you're never supposed to use. Movements so rehearsed, they haunt your sleep. You prepare for battles that may never come. Because in Sparta, war is not the exception. It's the ideal. The absence of battle is not peace, it's preparation. You couldn't just be strong, you had to be seamless. You weren't allowed to bend, even inward. Can't speak out of turn. Can't question orders. Can't want something that doesn't involve shields or spears. You see friends buckle under it. Some go quiet, others become cruel. Some simply walk into training one day and never come out. Sparta doesn't make room for the human soul to stretch. It compresses it, refines it, until all that's left is obedience. And you? You're supposed to feel proud of that. Aging into obedience. Years pass, you get stronger, faster, smarter, but also more tired. The same drills, the same food, the same routine. Some men begin to age out of combat effectiveness by their 30s, but there's no retirement plan. Just reassignment to training duties, or politics if you survive long enough. Even then, the pressure doesn't stop. Elders are held to the same standard of composure and strength. You groan in silence. You wince in private. You keep your back straight until your spine gives out. Because in Sparta, no one gets to rest. Not until they're dead. And even then, only if they died well. Chapter 9. Love, Spartan Style, aka Secret Midnight Marriage. Love in Sparta wasn't dead. It was just very, very confused. If you were a Spartan man, romance wasn't something you pursued. It was something the state tolerated, barely, and only after you'd proved you could impale a moving target while bleeding from the thigh and reciting war poetry. You got married around age 20, sort of. That's when the state said, okay, fine, go make another Spartan. But it wasn't hearts and flowers. It was logistics, the Spartan first date. You didn't meet your bride through courtship. There was no love letter, no chance meeting at the olive stand, no poetry recitals under the stars. Your marriage was arranged, usually by your family or your commander. You were paired with a woman who, by all accounts, could probably wrestle you into a headlock. That was a plus. Spartan women were expected to be physically strong, because weak mothers meant weak babies, and weak babies meant trips to Mount Tychicus. On the night of your wedding, your bride didn't wear a white dress. She shaved her head, put on men's clothing, and waited for you in a dark room. Why? Because marriage was seen as a disruption to military focus. Men were supposed to bond with their fellow soldiers, not get gooey-eyed over domestic bliss. So the state allowed marriage, but only in secret. You snuck out from the barracks, like a teenager avoiding curfew, and had your romantic moment. Quiet, brief, efficient, and then you snuck back. Married life, Spartan style. For the first few years, sometimes a full decade, you didn't even live with your wife. You stayed in the barracks, you trained, you drilled, You ate pig's blood soup with your mess group while your wife managed the household alone. She might bear your child without ever seeing you in daylight. She'd raise them, shape them, prepare them for the system that would take them at age 7. You'd get updates, maybe, between spear polishing and goat staring drills. Sometimes the arrangement worked, sometimes it didn't. There were love stories, rumors of husbands risking punishment to see their wives more often, of men who wrote poetry in secret, of women who fought off guards to visit their husbands in camp. But more often, it was duty. Romance was a whispered luxury, like honey, or free will. Spartan women weren't meek. If you imagined Spartan wives as submissive, think again. Spartan women could own land, they managed finances, they raised warriors, and they didn't shy away from opinion. A Spartan woman might greet you after war with a blunt, "Why are you still alive?" If you lost your shield, she wouldn't kiss you. She'd question your worth. Marriage in Sparta wasn't about softness. It was about function, procreation, property, power. Love could grow, but it was never the point, the pressure to produce. The only acceptable emotion around marriage. Reproductive anxiety. You were expected to create Spartan citizens, strong ones. Boys, ideally. The state didn't track your anniversary, it tracked your fertility. If a couple failed to produce children after a few years, the state might step in. Men were sometimes encouraged to father children with other women, or to lend their wives to younger, fitter men, all in the name of improving the stock. This wasn't scandalous. It was state-sponsored matchmaking. And feelings, those were optional. The romance of restraint. Still, beneath the rules, the secrecy, and the military crust, something survived. There were couples who found each other beautiful, who risked curfew for one extra touch, who whispered in the dark like kids at a slumber party. There were husbands who carved trinkets from wood and buried them near their wives' homes like hidden love notes. Wives who left olive oil-soaked cloths on stone walls as silent gifts. Spartans weren't robots. They were people inside the machine. Some even managed to find comfort, fleeting though it was, between drills and silence. Love in Sparta wasn't dead. It was just disguised. Snuck out the barracks window, holding its breath. Chapter 10. Women of Sparta, strong, sarcastic, and armed with opinions. While Spartan boys were out wrestling each other and learning how to kill, Spartan girls weren't exactly practicing embroidery. Spartan women were different from their sisters in Athens or Persia. They were bold, athletic, loud, and expected to speak their minds. From a young age, Spartan girls trained just like the boys, minus the murder internships. They ran races, threw javelins, wrestled. They were expected to be strong, agile, and fearless. Why? Because Sparta believed strong women birthed strong sons. Pregnancy wasn't a private affair, it was a national investment. So your childhood as a girl meant lifting, stretching, shouting, and beating half the boys at foot races. Education wasn't neglected either. Spartan girls learned to read and write, rare for the time. They were encouraged to debate, mock men who failed in battle, and cheer the warriors off to war with biting wit and bone-dry sarcasm. Marriage didn't tame them either. Spartan wives managed households and land while their husbands were off training or fighting. They weren't cloistered. They weren't submissive. In fact, other Greeks found Spartan women terrifying. One foreign ambassador asked a Spartan woman why the women there ruled their men. Her reply? Because we are the only women who give birth to men. Mic dropped. These women had power. They had opinions, And they used both. They weren't warriors, but they shaped the warriors. They didn't fight with spears, but their words could skewer a weak-willed man on the spot. And when their sons marched off to war, they gave only one instruction: with your shield, or on it. In Sparta, women weren't ornaments. They were steel, tempered, sharp, and necessary. Chapter 11. Meal Prep, but Make It Mandatory. You don't just eat in Sparta, you report for it. Meals aren't private, they're military. You eat with your mess group, or syssitia, every day, same time, same stew, same judgmental silence. Want to skip dinner? You can't. Miss too many and you're expelled from public life. Want to eat alone? That's not just frowned upon, it's suspicious. What are you hiding? Shame? Cowardice? A second helping? The food is famously awful. Spartan black broth, known as melis zomos, is a dark soup made from pig's blood, vinegar, and salt. A veteran once said it tastes better the closer you are to death. Encouraging. Other Greeks who tried it reportedly gagged. Spartans? They slurped it like it was gourmet stew. But again, it's not about flavor, it's about function. Each man is responsible for contributing to the meal, either with supplies from his helots or whatever hunting he manages. If you don't bring your share, you're out. If you talk too much, you're reprimanded. If you reach too eagerly, that's noted. Meals are used to monitor you. How you behave around food says everything. Are you greedy, lazy, distracted? That's how Sparta weeds out the weak. And if your comrades don't like you, good luck eating at all. You'll be voted out of the table. Ostracized, spiritually exiled. Because in Sparta, how you chew can be just as important as how you fight. Food isn't nourishment, it's a daily exam, and you better pass. Chapter 12. Helots, the backbone. Sparta tried to break. To understand Sparta, you must understand its shadow, the one it stood on, the part it tried to erase while depending on it entirely. Meet the Helots. They were not just slaves in the way we often imagine, they were a conquered people. Most came from Messenia, a region subdued by Sparta in bloody wars that turned citizens into livestock. They were not bought. They were broken. Assigned to plots of land, Helots were required to hand over the bulk of their produce to Spartan masters, leaving just enough to survive, and sometimes not even that. But don't mistake them for peasants. They weren't just ignored, they were hunted. A day in the life of a Helot. Let's take a moment. Close your eyes. Now imagine yourself as a Helot boy, 10 years old. You wake up before sunrise, not in a bed but on straw. Your mother's voice is hushed. She's checking for soldiers outside. The Spartan youth patrols sometimes come by at dawn. It's never good. You walk 2 miles to the fields your family doesn't own. You dig, sow, and harvest under the hot sun. You're not thanked, you're watched. At midday, your brother arrives, bleeding from the head. A Spartan boy caught him walking upright instead of stooping. Said it looked defiant. No one intervened. In the evening, you pass a group of Spartan children. One spits at you, one laughs, one throws a stone. They call you doulos, slave. You keep walking. You've heard of the Cryptaia. You know they come at night. You know they kill the strongest-looking helots, the ones who stand tall, the ones who look like they remember a time before chains. You hunch your shoulders when you walk. You train yourself not to make eye contact. You learn how to survive by becoming invisible. You are 10 years old, you will never be free. The annual declaration of war. Once a year, the Spartan government performed a ritual. It declared war on the Helots. Why? Because it made murder legal. This wasn't a metaphor, it was policy. The ephors, Sparta's elected officials, formally authorized young Spartans to kill helots without trial, hesitation, or consequence. They called it population control. They called it state security. It was psychological warfare. Helots lived in a permanent state of dread. Anyone who seemed intelligent, organized, or simply too muscular could be marked for death. All it took was a whisper from the wrong person, or the attention of a boy looking to earn a name for himself. Spartans didn't just enslave, they humiliated. Helots were forced to perform rituals of degradation. Sometimes they were made to get drunk and stumble around during Spartan banquets while soldiers laughed and jeered. Not because Spartans enjoyed wine-fueled comedy, but because they wanted to teach their youth that excess leads to disgrace, that helots were less. They were made into cautionary tales, a living curriculum of shame. They were required to dress in animal skins, to wear their hair in a style that marked them as property. They weren't even allowed to sing traditional songs or mourn publicly, because even sorrow was too close to rebellion, the silent resistance. And yet, despite the violence, the fear, and the humiliation, helots endured. And sometimes they fought back. There were revolts, uprisings, quiet networks of resistance. In 464 BCE, an earthquake devastated Sparta. Thousands died. The helots saw an opportunity and revolted en masse. It took the Spartan army years to subdue them, and the revolt shook Sparta to its core, literally and politically. After that, paranoia skyrocketed. The cryptia intensified. Restrictions grew harsher. But still, the helots persisted. They worked the land. They raised families. They kept ancient memories alive through whispered stories and shared songs. Because even under the heaviest boots, roots keep growing. The grand paradox. Here's the irony. Without the helots, Sparta would have collapsed. The entire military society depended on free citizens not having to farm, trade, or build. The warriors trained because someone else fed them. The children grew strong because someone else did the labor. Even the legendary black broth, cooked by helot hands. Sparta's strength was built on helot backs, and Sparta knew it, which is why they never stopped punishing them. Because when your power comes from fear, you can never stop being afraid. The forgotten names. We don't know the names of the helots who resisted, who hid fugitives, who fought in the shadows, who whispered rebellion while plowing Spartan land. But they existed. They were the unmarked lines in every Spartan shield, the uncounted cost behind every victory. Sparta wanted to erase them from glory. But history remembers more than glory. History remembers injustice, too. Chapter 13. Festivals, Feasts, and Casual Flogging. You'd think that after all the starvation, humiliation, and mandatory combat drills, Spartans would let loose during a festival. And they did, by letting blood. In Sparta, even celebrations came with bruises. Artemis Orthia, the Pain Parade. Let's revisit the Festival of Artemis Orthia, Sparta's signature event. Think of it as the world's most disturbing game show. The contestants? Spartan boys aged 12 to 18. The challenge? Get whipped until you either pass out or achieve hometown glory. This wasn't private discipline. It was a stadium event. The shrine of Artemis Orthia was packed with spectators, parents, priests, visiting dignitaries, all gathered to watch shirtless adolescents scream in silence while leather tore into their backs. And the priests? They kept score. There were prizes, trophies, public recognition. But the real reward was endurance. You weren't judged by how fast you ran or how clean your technique was. You were judged by how little you reacted to pain. Show fear, and you failed. A boy's view, the night before the whipping. Let's imagine you're one of the chosen. The night before the festival, your herdmates avoid eye contact. No one wants to be the one to say, "Hope you don't bleed out." You sit by the fire, pretending to enjoy a cold ladle of broth. Your back is raw from training, your nerves are shot, but the instructors don't coddle. They remind you this is your opportunity to show loyalty, to prove you've earned your place. You sleep badly. When morning comes, you're stripped, oiled, and march toward the shrine. Your name is called. You walk forward. The crowd quiets, then roars. You take your stance. And then it begins. One lash, then another, then another. At first, it's just burning. Then it's fire. Then it's nothing, because your body goes numb. You're not even sure if you're still standing. You hear your mother shout your name, but not with fear, with pride. And then you fall. Sometimes they didn't get up. Boys died, that's not poetic exaggeration, it's historical fact. And when they died, they were celebrated. No lawsuits, no investigations, just a nod to the gods and a stronger round of applause. A mother might say, "He died well." That was all the eulogy needed. In some families, that was the goal. To die before crying out. To prove that the body can break before the will does. Sparta didn't just glorify endurance, it weaponized it. Gymnopedia, naked dancing, Spartan style. Not all Spartan festivals were bloodbaths, some were just weird. Take the Gymnopedia. This annual event involved groups of Spartan youth dancing naked in public squares, performing synchronized movements to rhythmic music under the blistering sun. It wasn't sensual, it wasn't silly, it was discipline disguised as performance art. You were judged on posture, timing, precision. Passing out from heat stroke? Bad form. Athenians thought it was ridiculous. Spartans thought it was sacred. Because dancing in Sparta wasn't for fun. It was another test. Carnaia, the fun festival. Then there was the Carnaia, one of the few Spartan festivals that included actual food, music, and games. Dedicated to Apollo, it had more relaxed overtones, feasting, storytelling, and, shockingly, communal joy. But even then, rules applied. The wine flowed, but not too much. The jokes came, but never at the expense of Spartan values. The celebrations honored order, not chaos. Even when they partied, Spartans partied on time, in formation, with proper footwork. Pain as ritual. It's easy to look at these festivals and ask, why? Why the whippings, the rules, the near-death dancing? Because to the Spartan mind, pain wasn't punishment. It was purification. Every lash reminded you who you served. Every drop of blood reminded the crowd what loyalty looked like. Every performance, whether silent or sweaty, was a way to reinforce the idea that suffering was sacred. Festivals weren't breaks from the system, they were the system, just with more spectators. So while other cultures celebrated fertility, harvest, or joy, Sparta celebrated discipline. Even their gods watched in judgment. Chapter 14. Politics, but everyone's in the same outfit. Most people imagine ancient politics as men in flowing robes shouting dramatic speeches in sunlit courtyards. That was Athens. Sparta? Sparta was more like a military staff meeting with fewer words and more knives. Politics in Sparta wasn't loud, it wasn't passionate, it was controlled. Tightly, relentlessly. Like everything else in Spartan life, governance was about discipline, hierarchy and silencing risk before it made a sound. Everyone wore the same red cloak. Everyone stood in rank. Everyone voted with a shout. And yet, underneath the stillness, tension, fear, and more than a few quiet conspiracies. 2 kings, 0 fun. Sparta was unique in having 2 kings simultaneously, one from the Aegeid line, one from the Eurypontid line. The idea was to balance power. One king handled military matters. The other oversaw religious rites. It sounds like a clever check and balance. It was also a built-in rivalry. These kings didn't always agree. They sometimes undermined each other, and although they wore crowns, they could be publicly humiliated or even exiled if they crossed the line. Sparta didn't revere kings, it tolerated them. They were symbols, not sovereigns. The real power, Gerousia and ephors. Above the king sat the Gerousia, a council of 28 elders, all over 60 years old, chosen for their wisdom and probably for surviving long enough to count. They proposed laws, interpreted omens, and could override nearly anyone. But if you really wanted to watch your back, you watched the ephors. 5 men. Elected annually, no re-election, no ceremony, just raw executive authority. They could put kings on trial. They supervised military training, civil conduct, and even bedroom activity. They could walk into your house and demand an explanation for your tone of voice. They weren't just administrators, they were watchdogs. And everyone feared them, because they were temporary and accountable to no one while in office. It was like giving a group of hall monitors absolute power, then changing them every year just to keep people guessing. The assembly, say yes loudly. Spartan democracy, the appella, was more theatrical than deliberative. If you were a full citizen, a homoios, over 30, you could attend and vote, but you didn't discuss. A law was read, proposals were made. Then came the vote. No ballots, no debate, just shouting. Whichever side shouted louder won. That's right. Spartan democracy was basically a very tense version of group karaoke. And if you shouted too loudly, or hesitated, the ephors would notice, and maybe remember. Politics without dissent. Dissent in Sparta wasn't illegal, it was just dangerous. There were no opposition parties, no organized protests, no speaking truth to power. If you disagreed with the state, you kept it to yourself, or you disappeared. Some citizens who raised concerns were stripped of their rights. Others were exiled. A few were executed quietly, with no fanfare. The lesson was clear. Silence wasn't just golden, it was required. And if you had a radical idea, you whispered it, or swallowed it, the pressure to conform. Political life in Sparta was less about leadership and more about survival. You didn't rise by charisma. You rose by endurance, by keeping your record clean, your movements measured, your gaze neutral. Reputation was currency, and one misstep, one over-eager vote, one ill-timed comment could ruin you. There were whispers of quiet purges, of citizens who stepped out of line and found themselves reassigned, exiled, or worse. Sparta didn't need prisons. Fear did the job. No, news is good news. There were no political campaigns, no debates, no editorials, no pamphlets, no media. There were cloaks, formations, eyes that watched everything. When the Gerousia passed a new law, it was not discussed, it was obeyed. When the ephors announced a new punishment, no one questioned the evidence. There was no courtroom drama, just outcomes. Stability was the goal, and silence was the method. Why it worked, until it didn't. To its credit, this system did what Sparta wanted. It preserved the status quo. It kept the citizen population tight, focused, and aligned. But it also made Sparta brittle. It couldn't adapt, couldn't pivot, couldn't absorb new ideas without vomiting them back up in fear. When the outside world changed, militarily, economically, philosophically, Sparta stayed the same. And in time, that silence became stagnation. That stillness became decay. Because when you build a society where no one is allowed to speak freely, no one's left to warn you when the roof is about to collapse. Chapter 15. Growing old means growing stiff, and not in a fun way. In Sparta, growing old wasn't about retirement. It was about surviving long enough to become a monument. If you made it past 60, you were rare, scarred, revered, but not necessarily relaxed. Old Spartans didn't lounge in shaded courtyards sipping wine. They joined the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, where they spent their golden years telling everyone what they were doing wrong, and occasionally deciding who should live or die. They didn't stop being political. They became more powerful. But this power came at a price. You had to maintain the image. You couldn't limp too much. You couldn't groan when standing. You couldn't soften. Spartan elders were expected to be examples, not just of survival, but of dignified endurance. Your knees might scream with every step. Your back might feel like it's been used as an anvil, but you didn't show it. Because in Sparta, weakness, real or perceived, was a contagious disease. And while younger Spartans trained, you watched, you critiqued, you whispered advice that sounded more like commands. You told stories, too, glorified tales of old battles, sanitized, polished, and retold until even the wounds started sounding noble. You weren't retired. You were recycled, turned into a living emblem of Spartan values. You were proof that pain could be outlived. And when death came, you didn't ask for comfort. You simply nodded. Because in Sparta, even your last breath was supposed to march in step. Chapter 16. Battle was a lifestyle, not an event. Most soldiers trained for war. Spartans trained as war. From the age of 7, every day of your life was preparation for battle, either real or imagined. There was no downtime, no off-season, no let's take a break and find ourselves moment. The agoge wasn't designed to produce thinkers or survivors. It was designed to forge weapons with beating hearts. And if your heart beat too loudly, that was a problem. War wasn't a disruption to normal life in Sparta. It was the point of it. Training never ends. Even as a full citizen, there was no relief. You drilled endlessly. Formation marches, spear thrusts, phalanx sprints over rocky terrain. Battle cries until your throat cracked. Maneuvers until your knees buckled. You didn't stop from pain, only from command. Every command had to be obeyed instantly, without hesitation, without question. Why? Because in battle, doubt was death. And Sparta had no use for corpses that thought too hard. The phalanx, moving wall of death. The Spartan phalanx was the deadliest group project in history. Each hoplite, Spartan infantryman, stood shoulder to shoulder, shield overlapping shield, forming a wall of bronze and muscle. In front, spears aimed outward like the fangs of a mythological beast. You didn't fight for glory. You didn't fight to kill. You fought to protect the man to your left. And he did the same for you. It was a living engine of violence. And if even one link in the chain faltered, the whole line could collapse. So, you trained until you could move in sync with 100 other men by instinct alone. You practiced pivoting without thought, pressing forward through fear, holding ground even when it felt like the earth was shaking beneath you. And when the trumpet sounded, you didn't run, you marched, because fear moved fast. Spartans moved steady. Your shield matters more than your sword. In Sparta, dropping your shield in battle was worse than dying. Your sword was for you. But your shield? That was for the unit. It protected your brothers. Losing it meant endangering everyone else. That's why the famous farewell wasn't "come back victorious." It was "come back with your shield or on it." Victory was nice. Honor was essential. A soldier who fled lived in shame. A soldier who died holding the line became legend. And in Sparta, only legends were remembered. Before the battle, there were no pre-battle speeches, no rousing addresses from kings. You knew what was expected. Instead, there was silence. Helmet straps tightened, shields checked, hands gripped spear shafts slick with sweat. You looked left, looked right, saw your herdmates, boys who bled with you in the agauge, men who shared your stew, who carried you when you limped, who saw you cry and said nothing. Now you'd die beside them, or for them. And that was comfort, in the most Spartan way possible. During the battle. When combat began, it wasn't clean. Phalanxes smashed into each other like tectonic plates. Screams, blood, spears snapping, shields crunching, feet slipping in mud that wasn't just mud anymore. You didn't see your opponent's face, you saw teeth, rage, or worse, calm. There was no room to think, only to react. Push, stab, recover, advance. And if you broke formation, if you turned and ran, the line opened up and swallowed you whole after the battle. If you lived, you didn't cheer. You checked the line, helped pull the wounded back, counted your messmates, looked for your friends, sometimes only finding parts of them. You carried the dead, cleaned the blood from your armor, and silently, instinctively began drilling again, because the next battle was always coming. And in Sparta, readiness was life. Glory was for poets, discipline was for survivors. Chapter 17, If You Died, You'd Better Do It Properly, expanded. In most societies, death is the great equalizer. In Sparta, death was the final exam. And if you didn't pass it with distinction, you were forgotten. There were only two honorable ways to die: in battle, holding your position, or in childbirth, delivering a future warrior. Everything else, illness, accidents, age, or cowardice, no honor, no grave marker, no name chiseled in stone, just quiet shame, the warrior's exit. If you fell in combat, there were rules, even after you stopped breathing. Your shield had to be found with you, your position in the line verified. Witnesses might be called to attest you did not run, because Spartans feared one thing more than death: dishonor. Your fellow soldiers didn't weep, they didn't make speeches, they didn't bring flowers, they cleaned your body, laid you out in armor, and carried you back in silence. If you were worthy, your name was etched on a stone slab, simple. Director. No flourishes, just so-and-so died well. That was the highest praise you could earn. The funeral without tears. Your mother didn't throw herself onto your coffin. She didn't tear her clothes or scream to the gods. She stood, tall, silent, proud. If she cried, it was later, alone, with no witnesses. And if she had more sons, she might say one was enough to die well, let the rest prove themselves too. That was Spartan grief, refined into steel. For women, one path to glory. Spartan women were fierce, respected, and vocal, but they had one chance to earn public honor through death: childbirth. If a woman died while bringing a Spartan into the world, she was memorialized like a soldier. Her name recorded, her sacrifice noted, because giving Sparta more citizens was considered an act of supreme patriotism. If she died from illness or in old age, no ceremony. If she died raising a child who fled in battle, she might mourn in private, but never speak of it aloud. What if you died the wrong way? Let's say you lived a long life, served dutifully, trained hard, never disobeyed, then you slipped on wet marble and broke your neck. Too bad. No honors, no grave marker. You'd be buried quickly, quietly. Your name mentioned only in whispers, if at all. Even a fatal training accident might be omitted from records if it didn't involve battle. Death wasn't sacred. Proper death was. Dying badly? You'd be better off deader. The worst fate was to die a coward. If you dropped your shield and survived, you were branded a trembler, tresant, ostracized, forbidden from participating in public events, forced to wear clothes that marked your disgrace. You were still alive, but erased. And if you died after that, no one noticed, because in Sparta, your legacy wasn't built on who loved you. It was built on whether you fell forward or backward. One chance, one standard. There was no almost in Spartan death. You either died with your shield or on it. And if not, you weren't Spartan enough to remember. And yet, behind all the ritual, all the silence, all the pride, somewhere in the cracks, you have to believe that grief still lived. That a mother stared longer at the stone where her son wasn't named. That a friend paused before drills, remembering a brother who didn't come back. That a wife sat alone, whispering the name the state refused to carve. But Sparta didn't allow emotion to interrupt legacy. You either honored the code, or you vanished with it. Chapter 18. The Myth of Spartan Perfection. Here's the twist. Much of what we know about Sparta wasn't written by Spartans. They didn't leave us journals or memoirs, no epic poems, no how to raise a warrior manuals. Spartans didn't write much of anything down. They lived in a state of sacred silence, because secrets, like spears, were sharpest when hidden. So if they didn't record their own story, who did? Mostly their enemies. Athens, the ancient press office. Athenian writers like Plutarch, Xenophon, and Thucydides told the world about Sparta. Some admired it, others feared it, but all of them filtered Sparta through their own agendas. Xenophon, for example, was basically a fanboy. He wrote glowingly of Spartan order and discipline. But he was also exiled from Athens, so let's just say he had feelings about alternative governance. Plutarch came much later and was more of a storyteller than a historian. He gave us vivid anecdotes, boys stealing cheese and dying silently from whippings. But he wasn't fact-checking. He was crafting moral lessons, historical fiction with a purpose. Thucydides admired their military prowess, but painted a darker picture. Sparta was paranoid, inflexible, and often barbaric. In other words, our entire understanding of Spartan greatness is a collage, a myth built from fragments, half-truths, and second-hand stories. And somehow, it stuck. What the myth says. The myth of Sparta is seductive. Perfect soldiers. Flawless discipline. No weakness, no distractions, no drama. In this version, Spartans are stoic machines forged in fire and purpose. They feel no pain, they fear no death. They eat nothing but challenge and black broth. It's tidy, it's dramatic. It fits perfectly on motivational posters and gym walls. And it's not real. The messier reality. Sparta was impressive, but deeply flawed. It relied on a massive enslaved population, the helots, and lived in constant fear of rebellion. Its population shrank over time, with fewer and fewer full citizens to maintain its military machine. It resisted innovation, technological, cultural, economic. It treated critical thinking as a threat. Debate was discouraged, dissent punished. And despite the myth, Sparta lost battles, sometimes humiliatingly. At Leuctra, they were decisively crushed, their aura of invincibility gone in a single afternoon. Sparta was not eternal. It decayed quietly, rigidly, until it became a footnote. Modern Sparta, the gym, bro rebrand. Yet somehow, Sparta endures. Not as a city, as a concept. It lives on in fitness brands called Spartan Strength, mud races called Spartan Challenge, movies like 300 where every warrior has 8 abs and no nipples, Instagram accounts with bios like train, kill, conquer, repeat are no excuses. We've turned Spartan mythology into a lifestyle brand. But here's the irony. The modern Spartan aesthetic, individual strength, personal glory, crushing your goals, is exactly what real Sparta hated. They didn't train for self, they trained for state. You didn't get six-pack abs so you could post a mirror selfie. You got them because your commander would beat you if you didn't. There was no flexing, no cheering, just duty. We loved the idea of Spartan toughness, but very few would survive its reality. What people get wrong about Sparta. Here's a short list of common myths busted. Spartans were invincible. They lost plenty, they were just quiet about it. Spartans didn't feel pain. They did, they were just punished for showing it. Spartan women were housewives. They were landowners, estate managers, and terrifying in-laws. Spartans were noble minimalists. They were scared of their slaves and obsessed with control. Spartan children were brave from birth. They were terrified and trained to hide it at all costs. Why the myth endures? Because it's clean and brutal and simple. A world where every answer is discipline, where every problem is solved with strength, where life is a forge and only the worthy survive. It's a comforting lie. It removes complexity. It strips away nuance. It tells you that if you're suffering, it's because you're becoming stronger, not because the system is broken. It's a fantasy that pain equals purpose. But Sparta's real legacy isn't just strength, it's fear, fragility, a civilization that could not bend, and so it broke. So the next time someone yells, "This is Sparta," while doing burpees in the rain, just remember, real Spartans didn't scream, they obeyed, and then they disappeared. Chapter 19. Would you survive as a Spartan? Let's not pretend you, the modern viewer with indoor plumbing, a favorite hoodie, and a mild caffeine dependency, probably wouldn't last a week in Sparta. Could you live without comfort, without privacy, without ever being told, "Good job," or "I'm proud of you"? Could you survive on pig's blood soup and hard silence? Could you endure daily whippings, midnight combat drills? The knowledge that even your own parents are rooting for your resilience, not your happiness. And even if you pass the agoge, stole your food, survived your beatings, bonded with your herd, and murdered a helot to earn your citizenship, would you want to? Would you want to spend your adult life marching in formation, eating under scrutiny, sneaking out to see your wife in disguise, and knowing that the only way your name lives on is if you die horrifically and with proper posture? Would you? Sparta wasn't built for balance. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built for one thing: perpetual readiness. It forged warriors, but it also burned through people. So, the real question isn't, could you survive in Sparta? It's, why would you want to? Chapter 20. The Legacy of Sparta. Discipline or Delusion. Today, Sparta lives on in gym slogans, action movies, and motivational TikToks. No pain, no gain, with a side of Bronze Age trauma. But what is it we're really remembering? A city that conquered the art of control, a culture that ran on silence, obedience, and blood? Or a fantasy, carefully crafted, then passed through centuries of admiration, exaggeration, and misunderstanding? The truth is, Sparta fell. Its system, built on fear and stagnation, couldn't compete with changing times. Its economy collapsed, its culture faded, and the invincible phalanx became a museum piece. And yet, we still whisper its name with reverence. Because deep down, we admire discipline, we crave purpose, we imagine ourselves better, stronger, simpler. But simplicity comes at a price. Would you trade art for armor? Comfort for cold resolve? Would you sacrifice your softness to become steel? Sparta did, and for a while it worked. But in the end, it's not their strength we remember most. It's their silence, their mystery, their willingness to turn children into shadows and men into monuments. Chapter 21. Enemies of Sparta Who Dared to Oppose. To understand the steel that Sparta forged itself into, you have to understand the enemies who helped shape that blade. Sparta didn't exist in a vacuum. It wasn't the only player in ancient Greece, it just happened to be the most terrifying one. But terrifying doesn't mean untouchable. And plenty of people, cities, and empires gave it a shot. Athens, the philosopher's punching bag. Let's begin with Athens, the cultural, political, and philosophical foil to Sparta's militant minimalism. Athens had theater, philosophy, architecture, democracy, colorful tunics, and a tendency to talk things through. Sparta had none of that. To a Spartan, the Athenian ideal was weakness wrapped in silk. Why debate when you can dominate? Why discuss when you can destroy? But Athens was clever. It had fleets, coin, trade networks, and ideas that would last thousands of years. Sparta, by contrast, lasted centuries, but left no poetry behind. Still, they had to work together sometimes, like during the Persian invasions. Persia, the empire, with too many fancy hats. When the Persian Empire showed up, it brought the largest army the Greeks had ever seen. Think elephants, immortals, arrows that could block out the sun, and enough gold accessories to fund a pop tour. For once, the Greek city-states agreed on something: not becoming Persian property. At Thermopylae in 480 BCE, Sparta sent its finest, 300 elite hoplites led by King Leonidas. Alongside them stood thousands of other Greeks. But history remembers the 300. Why? Because they died well. They didn't retreat. They delayed a massive army. They bought Greek time. And in Sparta, dying well was the closest thing to eternal life. The Peloponnesian War, friends no more. After Persia left, Sparta and Athens did the ancient Greek version of unfriending each other with swords. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, was long, brutal, and full of plague, betrayal, and backstabbing alliances. Sparta played the slow game: siege, starvation, and psychological warfare. Athens got creative, building massive walls to keep supplies flowing from the sea. Sparta built a navy, something it wasn't known for, and eventually blockaded Athens into submission. Sparta won, but barely, and the victory was a poisoned chalice. The cost? Sparta's own stability. Thebes, the underdog with a secret weapon. While Sparta basked in its post-war glow, Thebes trained in the shadows. In 371 BCE, at the Battle of Leuctra, Thebes shattered Spartan pride. Their secret weapon? The Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite force of 300 lovers. That's right. Pairs of male partners trained, fought, and died together. Their logic? You fight harder when your partner's life is on the line. They didn't just fight harder, they won. The Spartan phalanx cracked. For the first time in living memory, Sparta looked mortal. The ultimate enemy, change. In the end, Sparta's biggest enemy wasn't Athens or Thebes or Persia. It was time. The rigid Spartan system couldn't adapt. It depended on a small citizen class, a massive enslaved population, and an unchanging way of life. But the world changed. Alliances shifted, armies evolved, economies demanded flexibility. Sparta refused. So it declined. Slowly, quietly, until the city that once terrified the ancient world became a dusty ruin where tourists now take selfies. Because even the toughest warrior can't outrun history. Chapter 22. What if you didn't want to be a soldier? Let's go back in time again. You're a 7-year-old Spartan boy. You're small. You're smart. You're sensitive. You like carving little statues out of wood. You love watching birds. You once cried because a rabbit got caught in a trap. Congratulations, you're doomed. The Agog has no room for artists. Spartan society had a clear vision. Every citizen was a weapon, and you're trying to write poetry on the back of your shield. In the Agoge, there were no electives, no intro to painting or mindfulness for beginners. If you didn't conform, you didn't just get bullied, you got crushed. You'd be labeled soft, and softness was contagious. So what happened to the misfits? The ones who hesitated? Who flinched during beatings or cried when someone died? Sometimes they were weeded out early, left behind on the training field, mocked until they broke. Other times they became tresants, tremblers, public cowards. And being a tresance was worse than death. You were shunned, silenced, denied your meals with the Syssitia. No one married you. No one spoke to you. You were a ghost in red cloth. What if you refused altogether? Could you say no to the Agoge? To the military? Short answer, no. Long answer, only if you were prepared to give up everything. Your citizenship, your family's respect, your safety, and probably your life. Sparta didn't tolerate rebellion from within. Your identity belonged to the state. If you tried to run away, you'd be hunted. If you spoke out, you'd be silenced. But maybe, just maybe, you'd survive by staying invisible, by faking it, by learning to hide your softness behind sarcasm. Smiling when you're hit, nodding when they bark commands. You'd bury your true self so deep, not even you could find it. And over time, maybe you'd forget what it was you were trying to protect in the first place. Quiet resistance. Still, not every spark dies. Some Spartans, historians suspect, resisted in whispers. A boy who slipped extra bread to a starving friend. A man who sharpened his dagger not for war, but to carve statues when no one was looking. Others escaped entirely. A few Spartans fled, settled in Athens or Thebes, and became footnotes in history. Men who left behind red cloaks to find something resembling peace. These were rare, risky, but they remind us, even in the harshest systems there are cracks, and through the cracks, sometimes light still gets in. What if you're the one? Reading this, maybe you're the odd one, the black sheep, the sensitive child who never fit in. If you were in Sparta, you wouldn't have lasted. But maybe that's not a weakness, maybe it's survival. Because if everyone around you is marching in formation, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step out of line. So tonight, as you drift off, under a soft blanket, in a warm bed, belly full and unscarred, say a quiet thank you to your ancestors who didn't choose the Spartan path. Because comfort may not be glory, but it sure beats dying on a rock holding a pig blood sandwich. Good night, and may your dreams be just a little less disciplined.